Hello, my name is Cody Price and I just want to welcome everyone. It is now 1 o'clock, so we'll begin our presentation shortly. Today, on February 25th, we'll have a framework for assessing aging in place technologies given by Amber Joplin. For help during today's webcast, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box found in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen, or call 1-800-263-6317. For content questions, please feel free to type those in the questions box and we'll be able to answer those at the end of the presentation during the question and answer session. Here's a list of our participating chapters, divisions, and universities. For our upcoming webcasts, you'll see that on Tuesday we'll have our March 1st webcast on childcare, and then we'll have our next one on March 10th with renewing our love affair with cities. I just want to make note on the March 11th webcast, this was recently added. It's on urban retail, so if you want to sign up for this, go ahead and do so. And here's another, as you can see, more webcasts that we will have coming up. And to find a complete listing for our 2011 webcast series and to register for these events, please go to www.utah-apa.org/webcasts and then select your webcast of choice. To log your CM credits for attending today's session, you'll need to go to www.planning.org/CM, select activities by date, and then underneath February 25th, you'll see a framework for assessing aging in the place technologies. This is up, so you'll be able to log it right after today's session, and I'll be reminding you of these steps at the end if you happen to forget or miss at the beginning. And then afterwards, you'll be able to find a PDF and a video recording of today's webinar at www.utah-apa.org/pastwebcasts.htm, and this should be up by Monday. And again, I'll be going over this at the end. At this time, I would now like to hand it over to Amber Joplin, who will be presenting our presentation for today. So Amber Joplin is a doctoral candidate at Washington State University Interdisciplinary Design Institute. She received her BA in American Studies in 1983 and a Master of Arts in Design, Housing, and Apparel in 1986 from the University of Minnesota. Joplin currently works in the WSU GIS and Simulation Lab on pedestrian accessibility and public transportation modeling. Her dissertation research involves developing and testing with GIS a model for sustainable aging that includes individual, social, material support, and natural systems. And now I'd like to hand it over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Corey. Thank you all for coming today. Again, my name is Amber, and my research interest is in how the environment enables and disables individuals throughout their lifespan. Today, I'm sharing with you a framework that I hope will be of value to your work of creating convenient, equitable, healthful, efficient, and attractive places or environments for present and for future generations. Okay, Corey? Oh, got it to work. I've broken the topic down into 3 sections. And so we can almost treat these like 3 separate presenters, and if you have specific questions, please send them to Corey and he can alert me if there are many questions about the same subject that I need to address. But the first section is just going to be a background on aging, how that interacts with our legacy infrastructure, and a little bit about technology. The second section is a general overview of my research on aging and on environments, and the scope and complexity, and then several significant concepts that I think are terribly important for us to consider in our work. Finally, the third section introduces a matrix that may be of use to you. It includes individual, cultural, health, economic, legal, infrastructure, and environmental systems within which to consider aging in place technologies. So this first section is just I'm going to do some definitions and maybe give you some numbers and some trends and some projections. And it'll take a while because we have to rummage through aging and legacy infrastructure and technology. But I'll try to move quickly. The U.S. Census Bureau projects that the number of people ages 65 and over will increase from 40 million in 2010 to 72 million in 2030, and the 85-plus population is going to double by 2025. If you want to have a different way of looking at that number, they tell us that every day this year, 7,000 baby boomers in the United States are turning 65. I haven't heard the projections for 2012, but some version of this is going to continue for the next 17 years. This graphic illustrates the change in population structure. The darker inner column represents population projections by age in developed countries. At the top, in 1990, the thick part of the column is in the center. By 2030, the lower image, the wider area has moved up and the column appears a bit top-heavy. In the United States, the percentage of the population over 65 will go from 12% in 2010 to 20% in 2030. Of course, every community is different, and some rural communities, particularly in the Midwest, are already at or above that average. But for great information on all of these facts and figures, I'm going to suggest that you view the webinar Planning for an Aging Population, which had a lot of great information on demographics and the role of planners and ideas on housing models. And as long as I'm plugging the webcasts, check out the Developing Aging-Friendly Communities and the Active Design Guideline webcasts. Both of them had some great slides on health impacts and opportunities. So those are our demographics, because there's a lot of good ones out there. Specifically to aging, aging is a normal developmental human process, and it has losses and gains in physical, intellectual, spiritual, and social arenas. Not just losses, but losses and gains. U.S. Census data show that the continuation of good health, free of problems with personal and instrumental activities of daily living, ranges for women from the ages of 37 to 76, and for men from the ages of 45 to 80, with many individuals experiencing good health into their 80s and 90s. The kinds of loss, oh, I'm sorry, I guess I told you that. The kind of losses that they can experience: mobility, intellectual functioning, lung capacity, all of the sensory acuities that we value and miss. And then the last three, blood flow, muscle mass, and physiological efficiency, those are just their physiological aging. And so somebody may be, one of those wonderful people who still can climb Mount Everest, but they are going to have some elements of this because those are just our normal physiological changes over time. And what's happening is that individuals, all of us, and those that we love, are aging in homes, neighborhoods, and communities that were designed for active, mobile, sighted adults. As health and mobility begins to deteriorate, elders are no longer able to operate successfully in the shared community environment, whether it is because that is a damaged or really old environment, or whether it's an environment that was not designed for people who couldn't drive. Here's a place that's relatively new. Looks like it's a really nice place to go to, but if you're not in a car, there's some sort of a question as to how you would actually get there. You certainly couldn't get there in a wheelchair, and I don't know if you would want to try to go in a walker. And here in Washington State, when it's winter, I don't even see a path for a walker like me to take, even though I'm still mobile and still active. So the problem is that most existing built environments don't serve the needs of our rapidly growing number of aging people, and it ends up being unsustainable for individuals, for society, and for the natural environment. The longevity program at Stanford lists all of these things: that inaccessible housing, social isolation, dependence on cars, lack of safe sidewalks, and all of these are linked with increased rates of diabetes. Of course, if you have a car, then you're helping raising carbon emissions. If you move to a retirement community, you can help with age segregation. Back to our car, we can have higher prices in gas. These are all things that are part of our legacy infrastructure, I'm calling it. It's the way things are. And that's a really important thing to understand and to respect, because it's the way things are. And it's going to shape in many ways what we do next or what we have to do next. And it's also what we expect, because it is kind of our norm for us. So this is where we're going to jump to technology just a little bit, because we're going to rely on technology to help us make some differences and perhaps to save us from all of these problems. So how's that going to work for us? Who's using technology? What are they doing? What's available? Where is it being implemented? Well, you know, technology is like design. Every time you figure out how to do something or make a plan, you're designing. And every time you use a tool or come up with a better way of doing it, you're using technology. So it's getting a little bit hard to define, but we're going to talk about recent technologies and more kind of high tech, and the kinds of technologies that are rapidly changing, and that we don't actually know how they are going to impact us. Not that, I'm not saying that either positively or negatively. I'm just saying that something that is so new to us is something that we don't have a track record for. So we're going to have to see what happens. We're going along for the ride. So who's online? The Pew Internet and American Life report shows us, this is a fairly recent report. I think they released it in 2009. By age, shows who's using the internet. And what was really interesting to me is that in the oldest age groups, the 76 plus and the 70 to 75 that are represented on this chart, there's a phenomenal growth between 2005 and 2008 in the number of people who are using the internet. And that's really encouraging. And the other thing that I would like you to note is that in 10 years, the people who are in the 65 to 69 and 55 to 59 and so forth, you can just slide them on up. So right now, and this is the baby boomers, they're using the internet at about 62%, 71%, 78%. And so these are the people who are going to be the seniors or the elders in the next 10 and 20 years, and they're quite connected already. And it looks like even 76 pluses can still learn how to use the internet. So I think that's very encouraging. Future technologies for boomers, so now you have to talk to futurists. And here's a futurist who is telling us that boomers will wear sensor-equipped exercise clothing to keep track of their physical condition. Boomers will buy low-cost gene scans, and we're going to track our own health data, they tell us. We're going to say goodbye to tiny screens. I can't wait. We're going to have mobile phones with built-in projectors. We can push a button and we can see it on the wall. I love that. And some boomers are even going to have their medical records implanted as tiny chips. So that'll kind of be like, I don't know if the same companies that are doing it for our pets are going to move into the field or not. So the technology users, private technology users, let's call them, individuals and families, are using new technologies, basically, for communication, for entertainment, for connection with social networking, and not just social networking, but political networking. Education, and education can be formal, but for many senior users, it has to do with personal health education, going online and finding out what's wrong with you or what's wrong with your spouse. They're using it to get assistance, to get goods and services, for health. Recently I've heard that that game that's spelled WII is being used by seniors for balance, which really is important to avoid falls, and for monitoring or self-monitoring. Providers are using really high-tech. They're actually finding great savings and great service improvements by using technologically assisted medication optimization equipment. They're using remote patient monitoring, just like our baby monitor in the bedroom. They can monitor what's going on in another room or at a remote distance. Post-acute care transitions, maybe you don't have to go to the nursing home, maybe you can go home as long as somebody's keeping track of you. Assistive technologies, and you know, a lot of the medical assistive technologies they've really made great improvements in the last 1, 2, and 3 years. Remote training and supervision for staff. Disease management, tracking, for instance, I've recently heard that Google can tell where flu or colds are coming because people are looking up the symptoms online, and so then Google can track that, and the CDC taps into that to find out where the flu is going. So I heard that from a speaker yesterday, and it's probably true. I know ESRI tracks social unrest in the Middle East. If you haven't checked that website lately, that's really interesting. Providers are also using technology for cognitive fitness and assessment and for social networking. And social networking is really important for caregivers because that can be a very lonely job if you always have to be with somebody who needs a lot of care and attention. So they tell us in the future that our homes are going to be really amazing. They're going to be like going to Amazon.com. They're going to tell us, they're going to give us ideas for things we want to do and things we want to buy. The televisions will figure out our favorite programs, and they'll remind us it's going to start. They're going to keep track of older residents to, you know, make sure they're not doing anything unusual. So here you have couches that constantly monitor blood pressure. And here, the idea that the carpet isn't just going to say if you've fallen, it's going to say you're not walking right. And so that'll be kind of exciting. And of course, we're going to have the robots they promised us, and they'll put the dishes away and so on and so forth. And I think it's wonderful that they are training robots to apologize when they make mistakes, because I know that I would want my robot to apologize when my robot makes a mistake. So that's all very far away, but look at this. This has been on the news for the past few months, and this is a prototype of ultimate granny flat that you can pop down in your backyard for your loved one to come and stay with you. And this has a kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom, and the toilet measures your weight, or your loved one's weight, their temperature, and their urine content in the morning. How convenient is that? Inside, it's really quite attractive. Your loved one will have a virtual companion, a video system monitoring the floor, and it monitors the floor so that you have privacy. There's pressurized ventilation, there's lighting, and there's even a lift in a track in the ceiling so that when somebody has to come in and help you get tub that can't move very well, then there's no heavy lifting involved. So it's really quite exciting. They're going to be available. The company hopes to have the first one out this year, and they plan to rent them for $2,000 a month or sell them for $75,000, and that is a lot cheaper than sending somebody to a nursing home. And so that's something you know, very technologically advanced that we're looking for in care facilities is now being made available for people who can afford it to bring it into their own backyard. Something else coming down the road are cars, semi or fully autonomous vehicles with cameras, radar, and computers that take the wheel. Apparently, high-end cars already have some of these features. And maybe they're going to be available like cabs without cabbies. You get in the car, punch into a computer where you want to go, and sit back while the car drives you there. Of course, we don't really drive because collision avoidance systems are standard equipment. And futurist Eric Klein thinks it's going to be too dangerous for us to drive because the computers are going to be keeping track of all of our cars. So this is going to be really great for the people who can afford it. And it's also going to be really great for those of us who can't afford it because there's going to be spin-offs from this. Public transit is going to be able to implement technologies that we can't imagine. The whole idea of the shared car, or maybe some sort of car banking or ride banking programs can be available, but things that we haven't thought of because right now it would be really hard for us to do and really hard for us to supervise and really hard for us to manage. It could be something like the cell phone where you know, people who didn't need a cell phone a few years ago, 90% of people have a cell phone now. 90% of adults have a cell phone now. So, and some of them have iPhones. And I started with a track phone because it's still a cell phone and it still gives me some of the essential benefits of the phone, even though it's not, you know, the high-end model. It really does make technology available at multiple price points. And so I think that although all of us aren't going to be able to have these cars by 2020, I think there are going to be some real exciting possibilities. Well, that's not supposed to come up. Okay, so where would we expect to see technology? Sustainability literature tells us that there are 7 human systems. I'm not going to argue with anyone on it, but I'm going to start with those. There's housing, transportation, business and industry, agriculture, and so on and so forth. And if you start searching on the internet, you actually find out that you can search for smart housing, smart cars, smart manufacturing. Yes, there's smart agriculture. We know there are smartphones. There's smart care, though they probably use other words. There's certainly web-enhanced education, and there is smart government. We're doing a lot of smart things in government, but implementing technology in our work to help make better decisions in planning is a way that we can have even smarter administrative processes. And we can look for ubiquitous applications. Technology is going to affect housing. It is. It is affecting transportation. It is affecting business and industry and all of those other areas. And we may as well just plan on it because it's happening and it's going to happen and it's going to accelerate. And I bring all of that up because elders are just people who've been around a while. And they live in all the same places that we do, and they, some of them work in the same places that we do, and some of them go to school in the same places that we do, or they have. And so they are affected by all of those systems that were on the last slide. Elders they're impacted by the place they are, by the space they occupy. If they're relocated, they're impacted by meaning. They're significant activities. They're impacted by community connections, by programs, by policies, positive and negative, crime, healthcare, access to services. They're affected by stigma, by poverty, by safety, hazards, pollution, and they're affected by access to nature and to spirituality and to transcendence. And we're going to find technology involved in each of these areas. In fact, I recently heard on NPR that there is an app for preparing to go to confession. So there's a case where technology is enabling people to prepare themselves for spiritual activity. And I'm sure there are many others when we think about things that we find on the internet. But thought it was a really interesting example when it's hard to say, what does spirituality have to do with my work as a planner? Well, spirituality occurs in a place, and as a planner, I deal with places. And so I have to think about places where people go to have spiritual experience, or where people go to have transcendent experiences, or where people go to have quiet, personal, or creative experiences. Okay, this brings me to the end of section 1, and so I've asked Corey if there's a lot of questions on the same subject to let me know, and we'll stop and answer those. Otherwise, I'm going to go on to section 2.
The only question we had is the virtual companion available now? And if so, like where it is available?
I'm sure it's available now because they have virtual companions in Japan, and I would just do an internet search for virtual companion and personal robot, because you know that depending on how specific a virtual companion you need, some people just have, it's the equivalent of a dog or a cat, only you don't have to feed it or clean up after it. And I know in some of the, there have been some news shows on NBC and ABC on homes that where children want to keep track of mom or dad, and they live across the country, and so they're letting mom or dad stay in their own home, but they're putting in monitoring systems. A lot of these monitoring systems, obviously, they link to a service center, much like the service center you would have from your call for help button that a lot of our seniors wear around their neck. They push a button and somebody knows to call them on the phone. Well, so that's a call center, and so they will have a monitoring center, usually at a care facility or a health facility, that monitors the individual who's subscribed to their service. And so some of those programs also have those virtual companions. And you can even find little videos on YouTube about people's experiences with them. And a lot of times families expect that the senior isn't going to like them, that they're going to feel like Big Brother is watching. But it turns out that we actually get quite used to ubiquitous cameras, and if nothing bad happens to us, we sort of forget about them. And a lot of the seniors that have been featured in the programs have just been really positive about it. So, it's kind of like everything else. It has really good parts, and I'm sure it has drawbacks and costs. But if it's a compromise, between living at home and going to a much more restrictive environment, I know that a lot of people are willing to make that compromise. So thanks for that question. Okay, gather my thoughts for a minute. So the scope of so I'm a graduate student. I'm in a doctoral program, and I've been doing a lot of research for 3 years, which is way too long, but I've been doing a lot of research on how the environment enables and disables us through our lifespan. And most of my research is on aging, although currently I'm working on obesity and adolescence. But the concepts are really similar, and so that's what's making I want to share this with you, because this has been very helpful for me. But the scope of the literature, when you try to study something as broad as aging, and when you try to study something as broad as the environment, just becomes overwhelming. The fields that I read in, and I continue to read in, are from the health and design, gerontology, environmental sciences. And in order to manage the amount of information that was out there, I chose to focus on the theoretical models which are applicable to aging in the built environment. There are actually very few models on aging I don't know that there is actually one model on aging in the built environment, but there are many models that either talk about aging, or they talk about the environment, or they talk about the built environment. So what I tried to do is I tried to collect all of those models, and I want to share with you 6 of them that I think are really important. And they're very important, and we rarely get to become familiar with them in our field. The first one comes from environmental gerontology, which is based on the concept that there's a relationship between persons and their environment, and that this relationship can be described, explained, and modified in order to improve quality of life for aging individuals. And this is the foundational model, the ecological model of aging, and everybody says it's commonly referred to as the competence press model, but actually it's commonly referred to as the environment press model. This model focuses on capacity, on competence. So here on this axis, an individual can have low or high competence. There's a range of competencies. And on this axis, we have the environmental press. There can be a small amount of environmental press, and environmental press is pressure from the environment, or there could be strong environmental press. And so some examples of environmental press might be when it's too cold, or when it's too hot, or when there's a lot of hostility in the environment, or when there's a lot of pressure to perform in the environment, or when there are many cracks in the sidewalk. So all of these kinds of things are things that are challenges. So I guess we could talk about environmental press as being challenges, and competence as being our ability to handle the challenges. And the idea behind this model is that there's a kind of, when we have high competence, we can handle quite high levels of environmental pressure. So this is the case of the people who can climb Mount Everest. They have high competence, and they can handle climbing a mountain without much air and with a whole lot of snow and wind. Now the theory here is, as our competence reduces, then we cannot handle as wide a zone of press. And so we have a zone of maximum comfort, and then we have a zone of, when it's, our maximum comfort is kind of our easy chair, and then our zone of maximum performance is when they get us out of the easy chair, maybe they put us on that exercise ball, because that's like making us stronger, and we're getting a good core. But we're still quite comfortable. We're good there. If the press gets too strong, it starts being a marginal situation, like I'm so hot, I'm not pleasant anymore, or I'm so cold, I can't hold my keys to open the door. If it gets too cold, then I get into this negative affect and maladaptive behavior, and that would be, I might say bad words and have a really bad mood, or I might give up. And the same thing happens if there isn't enough environmental press. So if you take me and you put me in a nursing home prematurely, and I don't have to cook my food or do my laundry or pick up my clothes or scrub my back or wash behind my ears, pretty soon it's entirely possible that I may not have good mood or good behavior. I might start getting really crabby or really whiny or depressed or something like that. So this is the model that is kind of the foundational model from the gerontology field, especially the environmental gerontology field. And it's a brilliant model, of course, but it's also highly criticized, because if you take it, you know, as the only explanation for how people relate to their environment, you're really looking at organisms and not people. And people aren't organisms. You know, we have stories. We can, you know, watch wonderful stories on movies or, you know, on public television about people who've been in really strong environmental press, and they've been fine. They've been heroic. And so, and then, you know, we find people who are whiny, you know, no matter what. So there's a lot more to a person than the fact that and we are organisms, but we're more than organisms, we're selves. And so we also have this whole part of the individual that has a whole lot to do with how we behave and our mood, and maybe it has to do with who we are and, you know, what our values and our value as human beings. And so I'm getting out of the planning disciplines, but we have to fit it in here somehow, because I guess I'm not really, because the truth is that the reason that we have planning and design disciplines is to create good environments for people. And so we're not creating the kind of environment that they did in the movie Matrix, where you take all the people and you plug them in and you feed them the correct nutrients and you play movies for them, because we believe that people, have a lot more than just that organism. People they have spirits and they have creativity, and all of these things are valuable and need to be fostered. Okay, so this is the person environment, the foundation for thinking about people in the environment. The second model is a model that includes everything, because the question is okay, so what's the environment? And turns out that everything is the environment, because there's the natural environment, which is, nature and the sun and the planet and water and wind and ice and snow. And then there's the environment that we have built, and that's the built environment, and our streets and our houses and communication, water, sewage, utilities, all of it. Also, the people that create those things and manage those things and provide those services. So all of those are important elements of our environment, and as are the things that we create with our built capital and our human capital. And so we create things like health and wealth. We create leisure and mobility. We create knowledge. We create communication, and we create consumer goods. And why do we do that? We do that so that people will be happy and live in harmony and have identities and fulfillment, and on and on. So this particular model comes from the sustainability literature, and Donella Meadows uses it in order to find indicators of sustainability, because if it's not serving people, then it's not sustainable for people. And this is a model from economics, and so everything is either an end or a means. And so the ends are at the top. The ultimate end is human well-being. That's the ultimate end for humans. The intermediate end for humans are those things that we like to have, those things that make us happy or make us safe. The intermediate means that we use are the labor and the tools. And the ultimate means is what we have from the earth and from the sun. And so this model has room for everything, and you can see in the center it has room for the disciplines. It's got science and technology, it's got politics and economics, and it's got theology and aesthetics. So this is a great model because it helps think about, am I considering everything? So if you look at this model, it says, okay, have you considered everything? And this model really tries. What this model doesn't really get, it starts the conversation by pointing out that everything comes from the earth, and everything that we do is intended to be for human well-being. And I'm not saying that we don't care about animal well-being. I'm just saying that most of us would like to be one of the species that survives, even though most of us would also like the other species to survive as well, and we would like to thrive. So I'm not trying to be too human-centric here, but we honestly are working for human well-being, and we should be a little bit more explicit about it, because sometimes I think we forget. Sometimes I think we think we're working for efficiency, but we're actually working for well-being, and efficiency is one of the steps that we use to get to well-being. Okay, the third model is really trying to get at the kinds of values that underlie our basis for doing something. H.R. Moody has been working in education for elderly people for many, many, many years, and I believe he may have recently retired as the head of education for AARP, and before that I think he was head of education for the adult education program in the country. So he really has a lot of great information on how people are educated. And he came up with these modal patterns for the treatment of the age that he noticed was happening in education. And he started at the bottom, and he said that a lot of times we don't provide education for seniors because why would we educate somebody? They're not useful anymore. So we don't educate them. But then if you go up to stage 2, somebody might think about this and say, wait, it's not right. Old people should have some services. Let's give them a craft class. They'll enjoy that. And so that would be a stage 2 kind of educational experience. And then somebody else might say, you know, those are retired professors. They probably don't want a craft class. They probably want to teach the craft class. Why don't you ask them and let them tell you what they should be doing? And the most amazing thing happens when you do that, where people have great ideas and they take responsibility, and suddenly the program blossoms and a lot of people are enjoying it and people are coming and they're having a lot of benefit from it, and Moody would call that stage 3 of participation. And then he suggests that there are very few samples of education for seniors that have to do with self-actualization. I think in my work I've probably found them in religious communities where there's actually places and support for seniors to actually develop their self, and not just a skill, or not just keep busy, or not just shut up and just sit there quietly. Okay, you've had your day and look what you've done with it. So how does this apply to the design of the built environment? Well, I don't think of using this for the design of the built environment. Actually, one of the people who presented on Wednesday, Len Huneman, talks about this in one of his books, really great books. But he suggests that this is also going on in the built environment, that we actually do have patterns of rejection in our built environment. And these patterns of rejection are characterized by keeping people separate, by mandatory retirement, which often leads to poverty, and there's neglect, there could be family abandonment, and the basic attitude is either repressing or avoiding seniors. And he considers that the type of value that this represents, it's just an economic value. It's not that we think old people are bad, it's just that they're done with their working lives. And so why would we invest money into making something work for them with us? They can go to places where there are places for people like that. And that, according to Moody, would be called rejection, and that would be evidenced in the environment. The second level, or stage 2, would be a social services level. And somebody stops and says, wait, we shouldn't do that to those people. We should help those people. They don't deserve that. Let's give them welfare. Let's make sure they have access to medical care. In fact, let's send a professional over to see them and make sure that we have identified all of their important needs, and then affordably, at some sort of minimal level, we will provide them with professional care, because we are caring people and we know what we're doing. I don't mean to be cynical, but that is where our country is coming from, and we're slowly moving into the stage 3 of participation, where we're starting to realize that, and this is driven, by organizations such as AARP, where seniors are not going quietly into the dark night. Seniors are saying, wait, I have a lot to participate. I have a lot to offer. I actually had a full life. I know some things. I have some skills. I have some energy. I want to participate, and I want to be involved in my life. So what does this look like? The social services housing, stage 2, is going to look more like nursing homes, and it's going to look more like separated off communities. And they don't, you know, a separated off community can be a very nice place, but it is separated off. And when it's a very nice place, it's usually only available for those who have enough money to pay for it. Back to the participation stage, we get a whole different kind of a built environment, because here we have our aging in place. We can stay in our community. We can stay in our home. We can be social integrated. We can be normal. We have equality. We have freedom. We have the right to happiness. We have the right to live in our home as long as we can. And that's great. It's a really big improvement. And, you know, the health impacts of that are enormous. People are much healthier when they have control over their health care, and they're much happier when they have control over their lives and when they can stay in their places of meaning. However, both in our built environment and in our housing environment, I don't know of places that represent a self-actualized environment. Possibly the closest thing that I've seen in the literature is the Nun study by Snowden, where he talks about as the people in the religious community, as they retire and as some of them begin to evidence severe physical and in many cases severe mental limitations, it turns out in these communities that by keeping all of the residents living together and eating together, that the people that have the more difficulty remembering how to eat or remembering that they need to eat, they can look around themselves and they can see somebody else who's doing what they need to do, and they can model their behavior. And so they find that there's a much higher quality of life for individuals, even with very, very profound limitations, when they're living in an environment where they're completely integrated into the environment. What this would look like if we had this in our built environment is it would look like a community that is built that supports all of the residents, so that as you get more and more disabled as a loved one ages and becomes more fragile, there is within the built environment the elements that they need to continue to live and pursue their own inner dreams and wishes. And for many people that may be exactly aging in place, but it may also mean that beyond the door when they walk out of their apartment or when they roll their wheelchair out of their apartment, there's a zero-step entry, there's a sidewalk to the main sidewalk, there are ramps, there's public transportation, and there are other elements in place that allow a person to continue to pursue their life the way they want to, the way they've been doing it all their life, even as they become very old and very frail. So we don't actually have a model of that, but it's something to think about, and it's certainly a challenge for us to consider. Get pretty excited about that pattern. My belonging dropped its G on this slide. Okay, so this model takes us back to the person-environment fit model that was criticized for considering people to be only organisms. So this is based on that same idea. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't think I need to flip back. But the model is this thing on the top, and it's got this same idea that you go through time. You start at middle adulthood, and then you become a young old, and then you become an old, and so on and so forth. So you're going along here, and you're getting older. And so instead of frailty here, what you have is an intensity of socio-physical places over time. And this is a really hard chart to understand, but it's really important, so I hope you have patience to listen to it. So these are the expected intra-individual trajectories for belonging and for agency. So agency is what those people call function. So all of those people, all of us as we age, and we pursue an environment where we can function. So you will find people moving out of their big home into a smaller home because the big home was too hard to take care of. They're moving for agency. And then they need to replace doorknobs and have door levers because those work better. So agency is all about how well I function in the environment. And that is one thing that changes over time. For middle adults, it's very important. And as people age and become very old, it becomes less important. Now, it probably becomes less important because at a certain point, it kind of doesn't matter where you live because you've lost a lot of agency. So once you lose a whole lot of function, agency stops being as important. But something else becomes very important, and that's something that maybe wasn't that important in middle adulthood. But over time, as you go from middle adulthood, young old, to old old, suddenly belonging becomes really important. So now we can stop looking at this and just look here, because this, I think, explains it a little better. So up and down here, we've got the stage of aging. We've got middle adulthood, the early age, and the old age. And then you've got how important agency is, how important belonging is, and how people fit. So it turns out in middle adulthood, functioning is really important, and belonging isn't that important. When you're just getting to that young old part of your life, they're kind of equally important. You kind of want to function, and you kind of need those feelings of belongings in place. But for the oldest old, this one is much less important because the need for belonging becomes really important over time in the very old. And so the person-environment fit dynamics are that middle adulthood, what you're looking for in your environment is a lot of stimulation and activation, and safety and familiarity isn't important, and continuity and meaning isn't particularly important. And then as you get older, then you want some stimulation and activation, but you start wanting safety and familiarity, and you start wanting continuity and meaning. For the very old, the stimulation and activation just isn't that important, but safety and familiarity is hugely important, and continuity and meaning is hugely important. And those are really important things to consider for socio-physical places over time. So these are the places where we live, or the place, the community, the home where we live. When we're younger, it's much more important to function well or to be stimulated and activated and have interesting things. But as we age, it becomes much more important to be someplace where we feel at home, where we feel we belong, our place. This is another model. I think this one's pretty easy to understand. And this one talks about, we have the same thing here where we have agency and belonging. And this is how do we get to agency and how do we get to belonging. And so Wall, I think this is Wall and Lang, say that our time, the places that we've been, the places of our life, give us a sense of belonging. And through belonging, primarily, we build our identity. We also have a certain autonomy, but the primary relationship is belonging gives us our identity. Whereas agency or function has to do with our behavior. So when we can do the things we want to do, and we have agency, then we have autonomy, which is a great thing. We love our autonomy. And agency also gives us part of our identity. Like, I'm the kind of person who always does this for myself. And so that having agency is a really important part of, for me, I walk everywhere. So part of my identity is I'm the person who walks everywhere. And that's related to my agency. And it could happen that I will not be able to walk someday. And I may lose some of my autonomy. And I hope that I won't lose too much identity in the process either. I hope to have developed enough of my transcendent spirituality so that I can still be myself when I no longer have as much agency as I do now. But together, the combination of identity and autonomy are what lead to well-being. And so when we are looking to create environments, to create communities, to help people age in place, we're really supporting both their belonging, which helps support their identity, and we need to add in to that built environment what wasn't put in the first place, and that is those functional things that support agency and lead to autonomy. Okay, Corey, how am I doing for time?
You are doing fine. You still have about 10-15 minutes if you want to.
Okay, well, I have a lot more to say, so I'll just keep going.
Okay.
I've got one more model that I want to share with you. And I don't know if you're familiar with this. This is actually quite been around for a while. This is the disablement process model, and it underlies the World Health Organization approach to ability and disability, and it's really quite exciting for us because usually when we hear about somebody, when we describe disability, we think about a person having a disability. And this model actually explains that people actually don't have disabilities. What people have is they have pathologies or impairments. And so in English down here, an active pathology would be arthritis. So if an individual has arthritis and so they have an impairment, their hand isn't working right. You know, they can't close it the way they used to. And so they have a functional limitation. And so they can't grab the doorknob, and so they can't open the door. So you would call somebody who can't open the door, you would say they have a disability. But if you put a handle on the door instead of a round knob, then it turns out they can open the door. So then they don't have a disability anymore. So the World Health Organization, their approach to ability and disability in the environment is that the environment shares the responsibility when there's a disability, because the environment may not be responsible for the pathology or for the impairment or for the functional limitation. But in the correct environment, the disability is really, it's not there. If you give the person with arthritis lever doorknobs, they no longer have difficulty opening the door. So it's gone. And that's a really exciting thing for us to think about, particularly when we think about applying technology, because, of course, a lever is a piece of technology, and a lever doorknob is applying technology to solving the problem. So if you have, Corey, if people have questions about any of these models, I'd like to take a minute.
No questions have come in at this time, so.
Okay. So taking away from those models, I think are four significant concepts. One is that when we're working with people, we're working with selves, and they're more than organisms. I think the second significant concept is that individuals, both their capacities and their values are going to change over time. And so that shouldn't be surprising to us, that somebody who was perfectly willing to give up their home when they were 45 to go, take an exciting new job someplace might suddenly become very stubborn about moving out of their room 40 years later, because even while they may have become more fragile, they also have had a change in their values. I think the third significant concept is that disablement occurs in the environment. And so if we can be creative enough to make environments more adaptive and adaptable, then there's going to be a whole lot less disablement. And I think we see that just with curb cuts. You can see all sorts of people out in all sorts of kind of weather that you would never think would be out cruising the streets in wheelchairs and carts, but they can, because now they have the technology to do that. And so now they can go to the store, or they can go get their hair cut or go visit a friend, and that's really important. The fourth thing is to really consider that we express rejection in the environment when our environment doesn't accommodate particular needs. And that's a hard thing to really realize, but if you have loved ones who've been in wheelchairs or have had other kinds of functional limitations, you can understand the kind of level of rejection that our environment creates for them. And that certainly isn't part of well-being. So, in my research, what I did was I collected all of these charts. This is, I'm going to go through this quickly because I don't expect you to read through all the fine print. But this is where I was comparing the hierarchy of purpose that had everything in it with some other charts, and then I took the values model and I looked for similarities. And this was, every time I added another model, I actually have 17 models in my literature review. So this got to be so big it wasn't useful. This is a chart of what we talked about today. We talked about the hierarchy of purpose. We talked about the modal patterns, the values, and we talked about the person-environment models. And I put this up here just to point out the benefit of doing this kind of charting. If you're doing some research, you're trying to think through, are we covering everything? Why are we using a framework? And this is kind of a very cumbersome, overdone framework, but what it shows me is that the person-environment models talk about well-being, but they don't even really think about it as having a category. The only categories that they have are behavior and mood, and then they have the press of the environment, and they don't really even talk about natural capital and sustainability issues. So you're going to find some of these person-environment models don't deal with sustainability, and they don't deal in meaningful ways with spirituality or transcendence or some of the other things. And they don't necessarily have to, because really they're almost medical models, because they're really dealing in this area of health and services. But if we don't look beyond these models, then we can miss out on some really important things. And the person-environment models would actually benefit from adding some sustainability issues to start thinking about what they're making things out of, what they're recommending, if that's something else we can sustain in the long term. So anyway, what I want to present to you is that synthesizing all of these things, what we really find that we have to consider when we try to deal with the whole person is that there are systems that have to do with the individual, and those would include spirituality, identity, and the body's health, and the body's activities, the body's needs. Social systems, the personal social system, family and friends, the cultural system, the educational system, economic and political, and the material support system, which includes all of the goods and labor and technology in our built environment, as well as the natural system, the resources, land, pollution, climate, and season. And so what this leads to, this will have some examples for you. So examples of individual systems are, and I'm coming up with transcendence, and I don't know if that's hard for you to deal with, but apparently a lot of aging people, especially the very old people, really struggle with the approaching the end of their life and feeling like, was it worth it, or did I become who I needed to be? And so this word transcendence is really about that sense of overall life satisfaction, that yes, my life had meaning, yes, everything I went through was worth it, and either I have something to look forward to where I can feel good about what I've left behind. So that's what that word is referring to. But that's something that if we want to have environments that provide well-being for aging people, we have to really consider, because that's the developmental phase that elders are still developing their individuality, their wisdom, and kind of their deeper inner selves. Of course, the social systems, we know those are all important. And of course, we know that the material support systems are important. People need the goods, they need shelter and technology. And the natural systems that, not only provide the raw materials for this, but are very important in well-being and in our health, and preserving and maintaining health. And also, each of these constructs has themes that go along with it. And so the theme, when we think about it, for when we are considering individual systems, is well-being, choice, meaning, preference, perception. For social systems, it has to do with belonging and being able to access the social system and being protected from negative aspects of the social system. Participation equality is very important. And of course, we need access and protection with the material support systems. We need assistance. This is where we need goods and services, especially people who need to have goods and services possibly delivered to their home, or they need assistance with accessing goods and services. And these things must be done efficiently, and they need to be sustained. And then the natural systems, the preservation of natural systems, as well as access to nature and protection of nature and protection from nature, and the, all of our concerns about sustainability. If you want to take this in a shorthand, if you want to look at it from, if you just want to carry 4 words around and stick them in your pocket, those 4 words are well-being, equality, access, and adequacy. So when you're looking at a new technology, you're saying, okay, how does this support well-being? And if you want to look at it more deeply, in order to support well-being, it has to have choice and meaning. There has to be some sort of preference on the part of the user. They have to perceive that it has value to them. If you want to have equality, then there has to be belonging, opportunities for learning, opportunities for two-way communication, enough, enough food so they're not hungry, they're not cold. If you're looking at a technology for material support systems, it needs to promote access, and it has to assist in access, and of course it has to be efficient, because when we work with material support system, we're talking about goods and labor, and those are things that we can't be casual about. We have to be very serious, in our efficiency in how we use people's time and how we use goods and services. And then the adequacy of the natural system, being willing to provide, being willing to put resources into people throughout their lifespan to access protection and provide sustainability. So I've given you some examples of places and spaces that are needed for the expression of these 4 constructs. So I know this is kind of hard language, but if we want to support a person's individuality, these are kinds of places where some people would choose to go. Some people would go to a meditation space, or a trail, or a bathtub, or a place where they can do the things they want to do. And one of the things that's really important for individual identity is when they have multiple choices. So if we're planning for technology and we're not giving people choices, we may not be supporting well-being. Like if there's only one store or one doctor or one provider, that may not support individual well-being. So places and spaces needed for social, they might be near family or friends, or pet-friendly, or someplace to volunteer, or a third place, a cafe, a bar, a library, a gallery, education, and all of those kinds of things that help us economically be involved, the phone, the computer, the community betterment group, and so forth. I think it's pretty clear. I think we don't have a problem understanding of well-being and aging, that they need to be able to get to the store, they need groceries, they need medicines, they need service providers. Sometimes maybe we forget that they need lawn services, that they do, or they'll have to move out of their house and go into a smaller place and they won't be happy about it. All of these things are very important to provide access and efficient opportunities to access material support services. And of course nature, parks, trails, trees, green space, as well as protection from seasonal elements. Those are all important things that, as we think about the places and spaces that are needed, we think about the technologies that support that. And, you know, that it's kind of overwhelming to think about all the different things, but perhaps if you think about, is this going to meet individual well-being? Is this going to give social equality or social participation? Is this going to give access and protection? And is this giving, again, really access and protection, and probably good concepts to use here. So, Cody, I think that I pretty much have to quit and see if there are any questions right here. Otherwise, I would go into how I'm using GIS to do this. So.
Yes, we've had a couple questions come in. And then for those of you still in attendance, just make sure if you want to ask a question, feel free to send that in and we'll be able to answer that during our question and answer session. And so our first question is from Sarah. What do you think are the key changes that should be made to the built environment to accommodate these new technologies?
Well, right now the technologies are very computer intensive, and so right now it seems very important to make sure that people have access to things like the internet. Having said that, it's hard for, you know, communities have tried to implement programs, and there's, you know, a lot of political and social things. So I would say that I would put nothing in the way of helping people access technology. Those would be the kind of things where, you know, requiring that or recommending or giving points for links to the internet, I think would be really helpful. So that's just communications technology. Another aging in place issue, two really important issues that we haven't addressed well are helping with home modifications. In Sweden, for example, every home that's built has to have at least one bathroom and one room that could become a bedroom on the main floor. And so what that does is that allows people to stay in their home a lot longer, because we actually never do plan on having an accident, and we actually don't plan on, you know, becoming frail. We actually plan and work hard to be strong and to be independent. So having policies in place that really drive more main floor bathrooms, more main floor spaces that can be bedrooms will help people down the road. The concept of visitability, if you're not familiar with it, that's something I think that would go a long way, because visitability isn't making every place ADA accessible, and it's not even universal design, but what it does is it lets grandma come to your house, because there's a door that she can enter with no step, and there's at least a half bathroom on the first floor. And if we have homes that are designed for visitability, homes, businesses, churches, I mean, a lot of these places already fall under ADA, but there are a lot of places that don't. If we work toward in the future making every place that we build from now on visitable, we will have gone a long way to helping people age in place. So what's the technology for that? Well, you know, this year's technology is going to be different from next year's technology. But the technology, you know, the technology is to be less restrictive on some of these creative solutions. And what can we do to be proactive in encouraging people to build things that are going to work for a longer time? And those are, I think, probably the best things that we can do.
Okay, a couple of the people asked about if you could address the GIS thing, because they do believe that that's important. So if you could give it maybe like 5 minutes or something on that, that'd be great.
Okay, well, In my doctoral program, they're making me prove my theories. They're not letting me just say, I think this is the truth, and going with it. So I'm doing a combination of surveys and GIS to test, to try to understand what is actually, with people, talking to real people, what actually promotes well-being, or what is the interaction between aging people and well-being. And so just a real brief presentation on geographic information systems. For those of you who don't work with it, GIS is, it just collects, it's just a way of storing data. It's a database that's linked to a spot on the map. And so the data can be, pictures of the satellite data or aerial photographs. And then, tabular information could be the value of the house. When you work with this too much, good, I wrote something. So for instance, in this case, I would be linking the population densities, the percent of people who are over age 65 if they've reported a disability, and then I can track the availability of public transportation. I can measure the distance to medical care. I can look for the aging program and see how far they'd have to travel to get to the aging program. I can identify locations of stores, parks, churches, senior centers, and any place that, all of the places that we go, all are mapped. All of the things we do them somewhere. And so all of those things can actually be linked to a location. And through GIS, I can layer those and look at them. And then, if you find something interesting, you present that visually. You can say, look, this is the way you can walk. And you can't walk that way because there's no sidewalk or something like that. A lot of the research we do for the city of Spokane, we evaluated all of the bus stops in the city, and there were, I think there was about 5,000 bus stops in the greater metropolitan area, and 75 of them had a meaningful route that a disabled person could follow. Otherwise, the other ones, all of the buses are handicapped accessible, and all of the bus stops are not, because they might go on grass or gravel, or there might be a landing pad for the individual getting off the bus. But if there's no sidewalk to use after that, then that's not really going to get a person in a wheelchair very far. I included this. If I would have had time, I would have talked about how planners can use GIS. This is, a map for children, but it's kind of, I like it because it's nice and easy, because you can take a map like this and you can start planning with it. Because if you have somebody, somebody gave me this idea that what if somebody really likes to fish and they want to relocate to some place where they can fish really well or something. And so you could take a bunch of maps and you could say, okay, so if you want to fish, you probably want to go someplace where there's water, so you have to find rivers and streams. And then you probably, if you're aging, you probably also want to be by places where there are medical care. So then you have to go to where there's some population density or some total population. And then you can start layering in order to pick out. So if you layer these one on top of the other, you can ask the GIS system to kind of point out places that have all of these elements, because I want to be near a big enough city, but I want to be by a river or stream, or I don't want to be by a city. I want to be I want to be back to the land, or I want to go into the federal lands, and you can determine your the elevation that you want to operate at. But you can also do this. Oh, here we go. I even had that written. So if you want, you also, after you figure out all of the physical things that you want from the environment, then start thinking about, so what else am I going to need? Well, I'm going to need medical care. I'm going to need housing. What else am I going to need? Do I need a job, or do I need services? And so helping people to find places to relocate is one way to do it. But another way to use GIS is for a community. I guess I don't have it. I turned off most of those slides. But basically, a community can look at their city and they can evaluate, where do we have services, where don't we have services, where does the bus go, where doesn't it go. Of course they already do that, but let's look at that in comparison with where the sidewalks go. Are the sidewalks going where the buses go? What about the schools? What about the senior centers? Are there sidewalks around the senior centers? Are there sidewalks around the schools? And if they're winter, are we making sure that certain routes are shoveled, or are we just going to plow for cars and not worry about people who have to walk? So there's a lot of things that we can do with GIS, with taking the mapping layers and looking for the places where people need to go and looking for the fixed routes that they have to take, and then making choices or prioritizing the work that we do to facilitate as much as we can, optimal use of resources.
Okay. One of our questions is, one second. How do you, how do we help our aging parents feel comfortable in like the new place? So this is going back to where you were talking about the smaller building being put in the place in the backyard. And so how do you deal with like the emotions involved with like the pride of not wanting to ask for help? Do you deal with any of that at all? Or?
Well, kind of. I mean, that is beyond the discipline, but it's in the literature, because the big thing is as much as we can to help people choose as much as they can, as many things as they can. And there's a lot of things that, and now I'm talking from personal experience, helping my mom downsize a few times and then helping her go to a nursing home. And sometimes a senior can be quite brave and they can say, oh yes, I'm ready to do this. But then, so then you're like, oh, finally, and you start moving ahead and you find out, no, they're not ready to do it. Or when they get there, they're very unhappy that they did. And I think probably, the best thing that we can do is to understand that we're, possibly we're violating their values, if they've moved to values of belonging or values of meaning, and we're trying to talk them into values of functionality, then we're not really communicating with them. And so it's really helpful, I think, and everybody will tell you this, let them take as many of their very important personal things with them. And, be very patient. And be very patient with yourself, too.
All right, our next question is from Ken. To what extent is there progress toward providing senior housing in their existing neighborhoods as a way to preserve their social connections?
Well, in the literature, that's considered to be really favorable. And I think I didn't give you a lot of information on relocation. Excuse me. But most seniors who, I think only 5% of people over 65 who relocate out of state. And most people choose to stay in their community. And I, working with some people with Parkinson's, they absolutely reject leaving their town because that's where their friends are and maybe their family or maybe the place where they work. So having senior housing, in the communities where people are living is a great idea. Another great idea that we didn't talk about is supporting the development of naturally occurring retirement communities. And if you're still here and if you haven't looked these up, NORC, naturally occurring retirement communities. And those are communities where people moved into the community a long, long time ago, raised their family. Kids grew up and left. And there's just a whole lot of people living there that are still living there, and that's home. And when there's a certain volume or a certain percentage of people over the age of 55, I believe, in some communities they've been designated as naturally occurring retirement communities. And they have services that can be brought in, kind of treat it like a planned retirement community, and have shared services with coordinators and so forth without making everybody relocate. And that's a kind of a neat model too, as well as building housing in communities.
So our next question is from Scott. They would like to know if you have seen the ecological model and or major themes used as a framework or guide for age-focused planning efforts, like in land use / community inventory efforts, comprehensive planning objectives, sub-area plans, etc., either separately or in combination with one another. Those construction concepts could easily guide the visioning process for making our communities more universal in their design.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I don't think anybody's doing it. It's, you know, it's in some of the work that we're trying to do in our department, but you really need to look at the Wednesday webinar, because there's a graduate student who presented in the first 20 minutes, and her research project was actually done in the Berkeley area. And I don't remember the numbers, but she surveyed all the planning entities, all the governmental entities, and found out that something like 80% of them have not incorporated any aging needs into their plans. And so that seems really counterintuitive, since planners are the forward-looking ones, and they're looking ahead to see what needs to be done. And I think planners are very good at seeing what's coming down the road. So it's just kind of surprising that that component of aging hasn't been integrated. But you're right, using an ecological model would certainly be a wise thing. I think it would be a great place to go toward.
Okay, and then our last question, do you recommend any good universal design websites or resources?
Let's see. And I didn't put together a whole lot of resources. There's a few here. There's the checklist for aging in place design. The Complete Streets for Aging America is really good. The Leading Edge Center for Aging Services and Center for Technology and Aging, those are looking more at kind of healthcare needs, kind of that high-tech stuff. I can't think of it, but I think if you keep searching, there's Valerie Brown works in Boston, and she does some really great work on planning for aging and universal design. So, if you actually look, yeah, I'm sorry, I should have thought of that. If you contact me, why don't I put it this way? If you contact me, I'll give you some of my links, because I'm on some great mailing lists. So here it is, amber.joplin@email.wsu.edu, because there's some great organizations and groups out there.
Okay, well, I will take the screen again. Thank you so much, Amber.
Thank you.
And then, so for those of you still in attendance, I just want to go through and the process of logging your CM credits for attending today's session. You just need to go to www.planning.org/CM, select today's date, February 25th, and then select a framework for accessing aging in the place technologies. And then, as I said before, we are recording today's session, and so you'll be able to find a PDF and a video recording at the utah-apa.org/pastwebcast.htm, and this should be up by Monday. So with that, I would just like to, again, thank you, Amber, for today's session, and everyone have a good day. Thanks.